Hiring the wrong executive costs you time and money. Leveraging work psychology, Spirit Consulting helps you hire the right executive so you can focus on growing your business. For a free quote, visit spiritmco.com. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back to the Tips for Team Building podcast, where our mission is to inspire and propel others along on their leadership journeys. I'm your host, Jaden Smith, and so excited to welcome today's guest, Sean Peterson. Sean, just thank you so much in advance for taking the time. For those who don't know you, we always like to start out with a softball. So, Sean, who are you?
Yeah, so I'm Sean Peterson, currently Interim Director of Talent Strategies at BJC Healthcare. And so something just quick about BJC Healthcare is large employer in the state of Missouri, divided up into 14 hospitals and community health locations across Greater St. Louis and the Southern Illinois area. And so within Talent Strategies, we handle recruitment from everything from housekeepers to patient access to securities, all the way up to doctors, nurses, leadership, etc. And so I currently own the sourcing and content strategy team, which is essentially the recruit marketing team. It also includes our university recruitment team, our contingent staffing team, our candidate experience team who handles onboarding, and then some of the work within talent strategies that relates to diversity, equity, inclusion, and how we're making sure we're in the community and making sure we're opening up opportunities to everybody across the places we serve.
Awesome. And thanks for that. Thanks for that overview. Outside of work, Sean, who are you? What do you like to do?
Sure.
What are some of your hobbies? Like what kind of keeps you motivated to do everything that you do at BJC?
For sure. So I think fitness is a big piece of it. It's funny actually. So pre-pandemic, just as a part-time job, I actually got my personal training license and worked at a gym part-time. And then the pandemic hit, and it was kind of like, well, better stay out of the gym because I have two young daughters at home, so the 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. And then between my wife and the dog, they take up most of my time. But good family time and getting out with them as much as possible is kind of where I live.
Awesome. And you chatted through a little bit about your role at BJC and what that looks like, Sean. Could you kind of give us a little bit of a summary of how you've gotten into the position you're in today?
Yeah, sure. So, I think I'll probably start all the way back to when I first began with BJC 7 years ago. So at the time, the sourcing and content strategy team was just being built, and it really wasn't anywhere near the iterations that it is now. It was really just a team of sourcing advisors who were the ones that actually went out on LinkedIn and Indeed and actually did the direct outreach to candidates, did some pre-screens, then passed them to our recruiter to talent advisors. And that was really the purpose of the team. And so I started there as a sourcing advisor, sourcing specialist at the time, working in our high volume space. So like patient access, security, housekeeping, food service. And then from there, I actually moved into a recruitment events role. So all of my, up until my recent role, all the move that I've had has been within the sourcing and brand engagement team. And so at the time, it was pre-pandemic. And so we did all kinds of recruitment events. And so it was anything from like a career fair to a national conference, or at the time we really kind of started piloting internal events. So whether it be like a hiring blitz day or a social networking event or career fair. So a lot of those. And so did anywhere up to 250 to 300 events at the time. And so I was managing everything from the marketing to the logistics to registrations to events inventory and et cetera. And then from there, moved into our food marketing systems role. So essentially the administrative piece of our talent acquisition and talent strategies tech stack. So at the time, actually, I had moved into the role right when we were moving from one CRM to another. So we had Avature when I started, and then we moved into telemetry. And so I jumped in mid-implementation and had to take and implement telemetry. But then, also had Yellow plus a little bit of the administrative work around LinkedIn and Indeed and Facebook. And then from there, moved into the recruitment marketing supervisor role. And so at the time, I had 2 direct reports. one who was kind of more of our social digital specialist, and then the other one was a backfill for me for my recruitment events role. From there, moved into the manager for the sourcing and brand engagement team, and sourcing and content strategy team now. So had the sourcing advisors plus the content strategy, branding, recruitment marketing piece. And then just in the last month, moved into the interim director of talent strategy role.
Awesome. And I think that, obviously your, focus being in talent strategies, and you really just painted a picture in terms of like just the opportunity at BJC Healthcare.
Yeah.
And the opportunity to grow and kind of the investment that's made in the people of BJC.
Mm-hmm.
Because you've had a lot that you've been able to do in your time there. So I think
fortunate.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So, Sean, obviously, I don't think you have those sorts of advancement opportunities and the opportunity to lead people without like showcasing the ability to build relationships. So would love to hear kind of more of, your approach as to how you build relationships as a leader.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. One of the first things, and I've unfortunately got away from recently, and I need to pick it back up. But one of the things I was doing when I had less direct reports is really kind of like during the first touch base, and when I was hiring people, actually even doing a little bit in the interview process. But I think, especially from a BJC internal mobility standpoint, obviously you want to establish pretty early on of where people want to go professionally, right? And maybe it's within your team, maybe it's not. And I think, one of the nice things about BJC is we are so large. There is so much opportunity to work with a lot of different teams and get exposure to a lot of different cool initiatives and projects. So establishing, what is it that you want to do? And then I think, we as leaders have a responsibility to figure out how can we get somebody from A to B, whether it be using internal training or getting them exposure to different departments or leveraging certifications or other degrees or whatever to get them to where they want to go. But then also thinking about like from a personal perspective, where do they want to go? Right. So it's like, it can be as simple as like, I want to better myself and I want to go run a marathon, or it's, I want to learn more about XYZ or whatever. And so making sure that, those who report to you also have the opportunity to grow themselves personally too. And keeping in mind that, from a work-life balance perspective, give them the opportunity to grow in each area, whatever they do want to pursue.
I love that. And just kind of, an analogy that I use a lot on the podcast. So I'm going to use it again. And anyone, if anyone does listen to every episode, they probably get sick and tired of me using it. But, I think it's so important to, as you said, focus on the growth, not just professionally. Obviously, as leaders, that's what we're there for, kind of creating that pathway, clearing obstacles to allow people to reach their potential, but then also like understanding that on a personal level. I think that like so many times people, I don't want to say so many times because I definitely like, in the work that I do of like leadership recruiting have seen this like shift even in the conversations that I have, but still have occasional conversations where it's like, oh, I don't get to know my people personally because they're there to do work and they're not there to be my friend and like this, that, and another. And like, so they kind of put up like a great wall of China between like the two, like personal and professional, when really it's like a chain link fence. Like you want some barrier between the two, obviously, but like knowing that like the wind blows and there's going to be movement. So you really have to like invest in both pieces to be successful in that way.
Agreed. Because I mean, really, as a leader, you're only as successful as your team, right? And so you've got to get them moving and engaged and headed towards the right direction. You provide guidance and recommendations around how to get there, but it's still up to them to take their piece of the work and get it done, which affects you as a leader and then affects your organization or whatever business that you're providing for.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Sean, we kind of hit on your approach to building relationships and really kind of like your approach to building relationships with your team. Would love to hear about like, obviously in a leadership role, you not just have your team, but you have other peers or supervisors or whoever it may be, like other leaders within the organization and key stakeholders in the work that you do.
Hmm.
Could you share a time where maybe you struggled to build a relationship initially with a key stakeholder and how you were able to overcome that?
Sure. I mean, I think anytime when you're working with, especially in healthcare, hiring leaders that maybe have had a negative experience with a predecessor or a negative experience with your department, there's going to be, um, the need to overcome any kind of historic perceptions or scenarios. And so I think, I don't know if there's any specific ones, but I think a lot of times, recently we've been fortunate to really kind of build out our strategies and communications and transparency to build a lot more credibility within talent strategies. But I mean, I think, a year and a half ago, anytime that we would have gone to the business or a hiring leader and tried to help them out, it was a little bit of a hump to overcome in terms of what they expected from us. I mean, I think a lot of times there's hiring leaders who expected that we sat and posted positions and then just waited for candidates to come in, right? And so what it came down to is really providing visuals, and it's like it's almost in a sense that the virtual space helped us out, because when you're working in a virtual space, it's like you really have to have presentations or graphics or whatever you can to use as a basis for discussions. And so it became, let's look at what we're doing. Let's look at the data that shows that something is successful or not successful. If it's successful, great. Here's why it's successful. If it's not successful, here's the data. Here's the solution. Here's how we're going to adjust. We'll come back to you with the results of our adjustment after X, Y, Z. Right. And it's using data. It's using strategies as a way to collaborate with those leaders, and build a partnership, as opposed to saying, we're going to come to the meeting and tell you what we've got, but we're going to come to the meeting and tell you how we're going to partner and get what you need. And so we've been, really fortunate in that the last 2 years, we've started to really kind of build that narrative within BJC that talent strategy is here to help. And we're going to do everything that we can to fill your open positions.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that just, like especially within healthcare and especially if you're, obviously like, business service line leaders are very like data driven, but then
Mm-hmm.
also like physicians and providers are very data driven. So when you're
Mm-hmm.
able to kind of like cater, I don't even want to say cater to that because you should probably be using data anyways, but when
Sure.
you're able
Yeah.
to kind of like use that as a bridge to say like,
Yep.
hey, this just shows what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
It helps to paint that narrative, establish credibility, et cetera, like you said,
Right.
which I think is so important.
But I think to your point around and catering too, though, is that you got to present the data in a way that's going to be relatable and understandable and digestible to the leader, right? Like if
Right.
I show them impressions data from Facebook, well, cool, we got 1 million impressions or whatever, but like, what does that mean, right? And so it's figuring out from them too, like when we present the data, hey, is this what you're looking for? Is this helpful? Is this understandable? If it's not, let's go back and readjust so that we can give you something that would benefit what you're looking for us to do.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important skill in leadership of just like knowing your audience and knowing how to tailor the message to your audience because the
Right.
presentation you give to one person may have to be completely thrown out, redone, and
Mm-hmm.
presented to a new leader. So
Yep.
that's definitely makes sense. So Sean, as you're thinking about kind of your journey in leadership, the team that you support and lead, curious. With this next question, what do you feel is like a common misconception of you as a leader?
Um, I think they're, well, I think with the newer teams that I have specifically who don't know me as well yet, is that I unfortunately have a calendar when you go to busy search it is constantly blocked, because there's meetings just all the time. And I think if you look at that as a calendar, you look at a director type role, you're thinking that I may not have time for the day to day or questions that somebody may ask. But I do. And I think it's important to be able to be available to anybody that's on your team at any time that they would need something as high level or as in the weeds as possible. Because that kind of goes back to the relationship piece of it, right? Is that, you want to, especially in the virtual space, you never want to feel like you're out on an island doing your work. You want to make sure that you have peers and your leaders there and available to help you and give you support when you need. So I would say if there's any of my new teams listening to this, feel free to give me a chat or a text whenever you do need something.
Yeah, reach out, please.
Yeah.
So as we're kind of like talking, as kind of shared with like, especially with virtual teams, it's important to feel like you're not on an island. I think that a lot of organizations are, just thinking of different ways to, as the transition's being made from like in office roles to remote roles, kind of like identifying what roles can operate that way, what roles can operate hybrid. I think that one concern that some people have is like, how in the world am I going to keep people engaged? How am I going to like um, affect culture or like just keep people motivated if I'm not in person and they're hanging out in their sweatpants or whatever it may be.
Sure.
So Sean, what ways are you as a leader kind of
Mm-hmm.
like taking steps to engage staff remotely, or like what are some things that BJC as a whole is doing to engage kind of the virtual working situation?
I'll start with as a whole because it's relevant because we actually just had last week a all HR meeting where we were fortunate enough to actually get in the office together. There's 300 people within HR at BJC, so it's a pretty large room, and we haven't done that in 2 years given the pandemic. But as things are opening up and following the proper safety protocols, we were able to do so, which was nice. But one of the presentations that one of our vice presidents gave was kind of around let's create some swim lanes in terms of like when it's appropriate to do a meeting virtually, or maybe when it's appropriate to not do a meeting at all, sometimes just to give yourself some space. And then when is it more appropriate to do a meeting in person, right? So it really came down to like anything in person, like this, again, strategy or workflows or brainstorming or things where, it's really a little bit tough to do over Teams or Zoom or whatever. That's when you gotta get in person. So I think thinking about on a regular cadence, when can you as a group or a team get together to sit down and strategize in a room for half a day or whatever? Because that kind of engagement is nice. But then I think too, personally, and then what I'm trying to do with my teams is let's do that, but then let's also establish like a in-person out of work type of scenario, like whether it be happy hour or a team building event or something, again, just to see each other. I think I just had one with one of my newer teams last week, and there was a lot of people who just hadn't even met each other in person because they've been virtual since they started. And so I know that it was well received. And then lastly, the other thing I do too is I don't engage as much as a leader because I think go back to your point of like that chain link fence is that there has to be some kind of barriers, right? But it's like I've got a team chat and I've got an all team chat, and it's there for updates and sharing, but it's also there like I've got some pretty extroverted team members, and I kind of lean on them to help drive discussions. And I think some of these team chats are out of control in the best way, but you can see that the camaraderie is there. Like you can visually see that the team is starting to build a little of the community. And so I think I'll keep an eye on the chat, and if I don't notice that it's like doing something for a few days, a few weeks, kind of go like, hey, why don't we throw something in there just to get some discussion going, and just being intentional about utilizing technology, utilizing what we have from a virtual perspective. And it's funny, as we're speaking here, here's a who's ready to party tomorrow GIF that was just put in the all team chat, and so that's perfect.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that that might be where some organizations or some leaders might fall flat, is like seeing those as more like transactional tools of like, hey, did this project gets done? What's the update here? Like
Hmm.
very like transactional work focused. And it's like, why not just like, talk about the football game you watched
Yep.
yesterday or your weekend plans or whatever's like,
Hmm.
just to, throw out an icebreaker every once in a while
Hmm.
of like,
Yep. Yeah.
what's going on? Hey, I
Yep.
just, I booked a dinner here. What's your favorite place to eat? Whatever it
Yeah.
may, like, just something to kind of like, like you said, build that camaraderie. And
Hmm.
I laughed when you said you were chatting through about how some of your team members had never, even met in person. And
Yeah.
I think back to last year as a company, we took like a company retreat, like a company vacation, and everyone like flew in to the airport and like you've seen everyone on a Zoom screen, but you've seen them from like here up, right? So
Hmm.
like when you see
Yeah.
the full person and you're like, how tall are they going to be? Like,
Hmm.
like who am
Yeah.
I looking out for? Right. So
Yeah.
it's definitely important to have some in-person events, as long as you're able to just really be able to like strengthen those relationships that have already been established virtually.
Yeah. And then the only other thing that I would add to it, and I need to do a better job of myself, and we've had a lot of discussions from an organization's perspective too, is his recognition too. And I'm not talking about like the big recognition. I mean, like if somebody completes a big project or takes on a big initiative or whatever, like there's going to be some kind of larger system wide initiative recognition that happens for whoever's leading that project. However, especially in healthcare when things get really, really tough, or really just in recruiting in general, um, you know, in the virtual space, you lose a lot of those like recognition for small wins, right?
Right.
Like the just, hey, good job, hey, whatever, applause. And so I think it's also the leader being intentional about when somebody has that small win, making sure that they're either recognized by their leader or even recognized by their peers, because it's pretty impactful from an engagement perspective too.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good reminder because I think it's always like you said, I mean, big projects, it's like of course that's kind of gonna come out. That's natural. That's kind of like
Hmm.
our traditional way of, kind of approaching that. But like even the small attaboys or attagirls are
Hmm.
just like, hey, great job,
Yeah.
like sourcing this many people. I know that's a
Yeah.
challenging search,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
whatever it may be. I think
Hmm.
that's important. So Sean, thinking about kind of, like with your role kind of including and incorporating kind of like the onboarding candidate experience, pieces, I guess what do you think is most important, or maybe like the three most important things like when onboarding someone to like, make them feel welcome and also like just have a successful onboarding in general?
Yeah. So I think there's really two pieces to it. And I think we're doing one really, really well right now. And there's one that we probably need to build into our repertoire. And I think that the first one is, I mean, really, when you're changing careers, it's not ever an easy thing, right? It's something that you think about, you get nervous about. I mean, doing the interview process, the application process, it's a lot to think about. And so it's really exciting when you get to that offer and accept it. Then you have to think about, okay, how am I going to tell this person? I'm going to tell the boss. I'm going to transition. Okay, I got to do OC health. I got to do a drug screen. I got to do a background check. I got to do all this stuff to, move from A to B. And so the first piece of that is making those things that you have to do for an onboarding experience really, really easy for the candidate, and make sure that we're providing them a fully transparent process in terms of how they're going to get into the organization. Right. So that piece, I think we do really, really well. We've gotten a lot of good feedback from our candidates around like your onboarding experience was really, really efficient. And, I had everything I needed whenever I started, kind of thing. But the second piece of that is almost kind of going back to what we're talking about from an engagement perspective, is like, we also need to be able to provide them that true experience of like, can we send them a personal card or a touch point or something where it's like, not only are we going to make sure that your onboarding experience is as streamlined as possible, but we're also going to be really, really excited to bring you to our organization to make sure that you, feel what our cultures and our values are and what our communication's like, so that by the time you step in the door, you've already got a really, really, really positive outlook on what the rest of your BJC career is going to be. So that second piece where I think we're building out and trying to think through how to make it manageable and scalable.
Have you been feeling unfulfilled? You want to be happy, but just continue to struggle. One of the best ways to experience joy is by caring for the homeless. A charity I've grown to love, River of Light, food rescues 1 million meals per year for the needy in Chicago. Imagine how that makes you feel, knowing that you're helping feed children and veterans. To make a tax-deductible donation, visit riveroflightchicago.org. Again, riveroflightchicago.org. No one should go to bed hungry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that like one thing that I've heard from others that I've, talked to on the podcast or just in networking in general is just like I talked to one leader who said that anytime there was a new hire, an anniversary, a birthday, whatever it was, just sending that person a card, like post, like not an email, not a GIF, not like this, but a handwritten card. And that, just kind of like thinking through what you said of like, from how do you engage them and let them know the culture? I mean, maybe it's tasking the leaders of each service line of like, hey, when someone does onboard, this is something that can be done, or maybe it's, someone within HR, or maybe it's both, right? But just to kind of like have that, like it's so easy to send an email or do things electronically, but to actually like have someone who like hand wrote something just shows like a different level of attention and, kind of commitment in that way. So,
yeah. Yeah. And it's like, it sounds so cheesy, but like, if there's something that we can do where like the candidate goes, that was really thoughtful. And it's something so small, but it kind of just portrays who we're trying to be as an organization too.
Right. Yeah. I think back to, my, my employer before my current, when I started there, I got like it was like almost it was a note from the HR, like the HR manager or the recruitment manager. But then it was also just like a goodie bag of like, hey, here are some branded like golf balls and tees. Here are some like, here's a mug, here's a tumbler. Like here's just like some little small gifts that don't really like, from a cost perspective, don't really cost all that much. But like to me, I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. Like this,
Yeah.
like they, just thought enough about me to like send me this gift. Like I'm thrilled to get started. So definitely think that, just kind of like agreeing with what you're saying of just how important that is to just be like, this is different than what I've had before.
Yep.
So then, now you've got them, you've got team members in the door. They have a successful onboarding. They're a year in. Like what's most important to like retaining staff? Like what's kind of your strategy of just keeping folks engaged, keeping them within the organization?
I mean, I think it's all the things we talked about. The recognition, the being intentional, the managing the virtual space, putting a focus on personal growth, in addition to professional growth. But, I think that the main thing is the transparency piece of it too. And the building trust through doing those things. And so, I mean, really one of those things that I feel like I've built up with one of my teams and working on it with the newer teams, is that I've had this come up, a couple times, that the market is so variable and so tight and competitive right now that it's like, really, if you're a recruiter, you're probably getting messages and LinkedIn and outreaches all the time. And so what I've kind of really said is, hey, look at team, if for whatever reason, if you're thinking about responding to a recruiter, or if you're thinking about clicking on the job alerts that you're getting, like, let's talk about it. Let's figure out, what's going on. Is it work related? Is it pay? Do you have a negative experience? But I think it just builds that trust and camaraderie and builds out the feeling that my leader has my back and is going to go to bat for me for whatever I need. Because I mean, really, people people quit leaders. They don't always quit jobs.
Right. No, I think that's so true. Of just like yeah, I mean that's and you hear that all the time, so it almost becomes cliche and people are like, "Oh, yeah, whatever." But it's like, no, that's what every survey says. That's what
Mm-hmm.
every, like if they're being honest, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes in the exit survey it's easy to be like, "Oh, pay. Like I'm going to get more pay somewhere."
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
but
Yep.
what even made you like start to look to get more
Right.
pay somewhere, right?
Exactly.
And
Yep.
that's where it starts. So,
Mm-hmm.
when talking through kind of leadership and building relationships and building trust, I think that those like the relationship that you're able to build, the trust that you're able to build, then makes it, I don't want to say easier to deliver critical feedback or constructive feedback, but it
Mm-hmm.
at least allows that team member oftentimes to see where it's coming from.
Sure.
And it's coming from a place of care, right? And trying
Yeah.
to help them get better and,
Yeah.
and reach those goals that they've kind of identified. But I'm sure that, as a leader, you've only gotten into the role that you're in right now and had all these opportunities at BJC because you've never messed up a conversation like that. It's always
Right.
been easy. It's just come,
Yeah.
like no, just kidding. Kind of to bring back to earth and kind of just chat through like the missteps that we make and how those help us to improve. Going into the future.
Mm-hmm.
Can you maybe tell us about a time where you did misstep in a performance management conversation? Kind
Mm-hmm.
of a little bit of the situation. Obviously, not disclosing like names or anything
Sure.
like that, but like,
Yeah.
what were you able to take away from it as a leader, and how has it changed like how you approach those conversations presently?
Yeah. So I think there's a few things, and so that we don't get into specific examples and names, I can kind of just high level. And I'll be honest, I'm still learning from my mistakes sometimes. But I think one of the first things to think about is, and it sounds like it's so easy to do in theory, but the execution of it isn't, is giving feedback when it needs to be given, right? I think it's so easy sometimes for us to kind of go, no big deal. We'll just tackle it later. And then a pattern becomes apparent, right? And then all of a sudden, when it becomes a big issue, you got to give somebody feedback and they're surprised by it, right? So it's like feedback, for the most part, you should never really be surprised about it from a leader going to their direct report perspective. So I think it's really tackling it head on when something comes up. And then the other thing that I tend to do as a leader that I'm working on myself is that I tend to give people the benefit of the doubt too much. And then I think it's recognizing that, okay, this is something that we really need to think through. We need to talk through. We need to find a solve for, or then it becomes like a performance improvement discussion, and nobody really likes to be in that situation. And then lastly, it's coming at feedback with because if something goes wrong, you hear feedback from somebody else or from other team, from other leaders. You never know exactly what happened once you were there, right? So it's coming at the feedback with and I hate to say this because it's always, if I ever get this in an email, I'm always like cringe at it, but like it's a help me understand discussion, right? Like, here's the feedback, give me your take, what happened? And then sometimes it totally makes sense, right? It's like, I understand. And then as a leader, I'm going to go back to whoever provided the feedback, give them the rundown. Or maybe it's better for them to have that discussion with whoever provided the feedback, depending on the scenario. But then if it doesn't align with, what happened and what should happen, it's okay. Well, here's what we should do differently. Here's what I want you to think about in a similar situation if it comes up in the future. And then, if a pattern does emerge, it's taking the right disciplinary action to establish accountability, and that piece of it is I think the toughest piece of it as a leader.
Yeah, I mean, kind of, so much of that resonated, and I think that like, ultimately like those conversations are never easy. But they get easier, as we were kind of saying, like when you build that trust, you build that relationship, because then like it's known that it's coming from a positive place, and it's not just
Mm-hmm.
Sean being a jerk and like trying
Right.
to like,
Yep.
it's like, hey, help me help you,
Yep.
where are we falling short. I think another thing that you highlighted was like, one, just like coaching in the moment, which I think, is so important. I took a workshop once called Coach Right Now, and it was like Coach Right now, or like Coach Right Now. So it was kind of
Mm-hmm.
like a play on words, but kind of the highlight was, one, how to approach those conversations, but two, like how to approach them in the moment versus waiting
Right.
until your frustration reaches a point where like maybe
Mm-hmm.
you're not going into the conversation the best way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think, lastly, with kind of having those conversations and giving the benefit of the doubt, can definitely like relate to that. And I think it's just so important. Like so many times, I think where some people like fall flat in these conversations, and I've definitely done it as well, is trying to like sugarcoat with
Sure.
positive around
Right.
kind of like the opportunity. And then at
Mm-hmm.
that point, it's just kind of watered down, where like if
Right.
you're just very objective, this is what
Mm-hmm.
it is. Like, and then like you ask questions, help me understand, what do you think you could have done differently? What
Right.
could I do differently as your leader? Like, you're going to have a much more productive conversation by just highlighting what you need to highlight
Mm-hmm.
versus like letting your nerves of the situation, or like potentially hurting someone's feelings,
Right.
etc. Like,
Yep.
just water it down so much that the message isn't there.
Right. Right. And that's where, kind of again comes back to that chain link fence, right? You have to establish some swim lanes and some separation. And as much as you want to be a partner and a colleague to those who report to you, you're still their leader. And so I think it's still making sure you establish those divisions, so that when you're coming at a conversation like this, you're coming at them as a leader and not as their friend.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think another thing comes to mind that I had chatted with another leader on the podcast a couple weeks ago. His episode released, and oftentimes I feel like I know as a team member, I
Mm-hmm.
know if I'm not performing, or I know if I'm not meeting expectations, right? So like
Sure.
I expect my leader to come talk to me about it.
Right.
Like, so if
Right.
you as a leader push that off, and then like, your team member knows, and
Mm-hmm.
they're just, like doggy paddling in the water trying to stay afloat,
Yep.
like you lose credibility as a leader when you don't address it,
Right.
because they may already know what the issue is, or that
Yeah.
at least an issue exists, right?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, if those who report to you feel like, you're somebody who's going to roll over, it's not going to go well either.
Right, right. So, Sean, we've had just such a great discussion today, and think that, in terms of wrapping it up, I think that was some good dialogue to finish up with. If people were kind of like just moved or inspired by the approach that you shared, want to like network with you, want to learn more about BJC and what you all are doing,
Mm-hmm.
how can people reach you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm always on LinkedIn. I'll be honest, like I'll give my email address. It's really easy. It's sean.peterson@bjc.org. But then if you're wondering about BJC, so we actually, we do a lot of marketing campaigns around one landing page. It's called bjcopportunity.org. But it gives you like a really quick snapshot of just who we are, what we offer. And can you link you to all the different pages that we have in terms of open careers. So other than that, I'm always happy to reach out, network, and answer any questions.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Sean, for being a guest on the Tips for Team Building podcast, where our mission is to inspire and propel others along in their leadership journeys. Really enjoyed the opportunity to reconnect with you and to be able to share some wisdom with our audience today. And, just thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Tips for Team Building podcast, where we propel others along in their leadership journeys. If you enjoyed the show, would you please subscribe and leave a review wherever you listened? You can also visit www.spiritmco.com to find out more about how Spirit Consulting inspires virtuous leadership. We'll see you next time.